Okay, so I wanted to do a video on the topic of consent and how this realm is governed by the laws of consent. I'm probably going to do multiple videos on this topic, but more specifically, I'm going to be focusing on like how consent works in the West, specifically in the Americas in this video. Now, I briefly touched on the whole idea of consent in my free will video. Definitely encourage you all to check that out if you haven't seen it yet, but I wanted to expound on it after watching another creator cover this exact same topic. And what I've noticed when it comes to this world, like I said in the previous video, the matrix that we live in, consent is required at all times. And from what I've observed is that in the West, particularly in the Americas, the US specifically, the powers that be controlling the US have mastered the ability to successfully acquire consent of its citizens in ways that many other countries have not. And I think that that is why the United States has been able to thrive to a certain extent or remain protected in ways that other nations have not. So again, understand when I'm speaking on this subject of consent, it's coming from an American perspective, because when you slow down and really pay attention, consent is always being asked of us in America at every single turn, right? Like I cannot download an app, order food, clothing, start a job without agreeing to the terms and conditions of a specific entity. I cannot visit a website without providing consent to having my data shared or my IP tracked. I cannot be seen by a physician if I'm not, if I'm feeling ill, like I'm feeling sick, and I cannot see a physician without filling out extensive paperwork detailing my medical history and giving consent to that practice to provide me medical assistance, right? You cannot even be arrested in this country without being read your rights, your Miranda rights, and consenting to them. Because when you look up your Miranda rights, the final question after being read your rights asks for you to consent to that. It asks you, do you understand? And when you say yes, no, you're giving consent. And one of the reasons why and this is going to tie into the whole consent thing, but one of the reasons why I think topics like abortion laws, for example, will always be a point of contention in this country, and it'll never be officially banned countrywide, is because of the concept of consent or the lack thereof, and how it's, as it relates to like abortion and bodily autonomy of a woman, it's so nuanced. Because if the pregnancy came about as a result of a rape or coercion, which is actually one of the most common ways that pregnancy comes about a lot of times, specifically in the Black community, but rape, coercion, aka forced consent or manipulation. If your baby was brought about by those manners and you did not want to be pregnant, like you did not engage in that, like it was a forceful situation or it was a situation in which you were manipulated into sleeping with someone, or it was taken by force of any sort, and then a fetus was created as a result of that without your consent, yes, it can be deleted should the mother choose to go that route without breaking any universal law. And so that is why abortion needs to be allowed for people that have gotten pregnant under those terms and conditions. Now, if you were to look at it even deeper level, babies do not technically consent to being created. And that alone is enough of a reason for abortion to be legalized. And it's not lost on me that the few isolated states in the US where abortion is not legal, like those few states are plagued with either extreme poverty, religious psychosis, or diseases. Like Georgia is like ground zero for like HIV. Okay, just saying. But again, that whole concept of like, okay, babies do not consent to be created. It's tricky, right? Because you have some people that will say our souls chose to incarnate in this life, or that we choose our parents, or we picked out our lives beforehand and we wanted this life and we chose all this in the astral realm and yada, yada, yada. And not negating that. And I do have a video planned as it relates to soul contracts and how that works on the astral realm. But being that I'm specifically speaking on the laws that govern our 3D universe, the universal laws governing our 3D experience, I cannot factor in anything occurring outside or beyond that in this video. Because once a baby reaches a certain stage of formation or maturation where it's evolved into a sentient being and it's now become a new player, with its own player ID in this game that we're all choosing to participate in it every day, we still will acknowledge that the baby or the small child still has not reached a certain level of consciousness where it can give consent, right? We'll look at an infant child that cannot formulate words and speak and recognize, okay, well, they still cannot fully give consent. And this is why violations against children in particular, any kind of sexual violations against children, any kind of abuse violations against children are always seen as like very evil and demonic. Only a literal demon would prey upon another being that is completely incapable of defending or speaking for itself. This is also why America is so harsh about treating people who harm animals, right? Because animals, if we're not speaking the same language as this other being, they cannot give, what does it say they can give consent, right? I think about the documentary Don't Fuck with Cats. It was people in the United States that came across the video, and it turns out the guy was in a completely different country that was killing those cats online. It was people in the United States that tracked that man down. I think they hired private investigators. I had to go back and watch that documentary again. But it was from the lens of like the American point of view of like, this is a violation against the cats. Like, you are torturing and brutalizing and murdering. You're killing an animal that did not consent to be killed, that they did not agree to that. Like, you're taking death, you're putting death on a being that is not able to fend for itself. It's not able to defend itself. So people will say, and I see all the time, like people will say, Americans are so crazy. Like, what is wrong with us if we care more about pets than we do children? And I will agree to that to a certain extent. Like, there are some people that absolutely care way more about animals than human beings in this country. But it, again, is all a symptom of like our being tapped into the universal law of consent and us recognizing when an individual or a being is unable to give consent and how that's wrong. Like, that's inherently wrong. And yes, I will also say America was built on human trafficking in general, like exploitation of children. This country still by far dishes out some of the harshest and most robust prosecutions and sentencings for violations against children and other minor victims of SA. And again, it's not because necessarily as a nation we're so morally sound or pious, like, not at all. Again, this country was built on human trafficking. But it's simply because the powers that be running this country understand that consent is required within this 3D realm, within this matrix. And in order to benefit from it the most by abiding by those universal laws, they must be enforced to the best of your ability at all times. Countries that ignore those laws, or they disregard them, or they don't even attempt to hold their citizens accountable for them, are always suffering with widespread poverty, shortages, lack, famine, disease, natural disasters, inadequate infrastructure, low IQ. And it's because their leaders, their governments, do not understand, nor do they abide by the universal law of consent that is governing this realm.